Just maybe you're wondering why I'm staying in front of Dalworthington Gardens City Hall, since this is an Arlington time capsule. The not so short answer is that this little town, surrounded by Arlington, is a rare surviving example of a unique solution to solving one of the Great Depression and Dust Bowl drought issues. Lots of farmers are going broke. Where will they go? How will they survive? Now, one solution was termed subsistence homestead. More about what that means in just a moment. Dalworthington Gardens, let's just call it the Gardens for short, and the neighboring community of Pantego are surrounded by Arlington, which itself is squeezed between Dallas and Fort Worth. So there's proximity to thousands of jobs and lots of cultural entities. The Gardens, though, is a little town, landlocked at 1.8 square miles. This compares to sprawling and surrounding Arlington's 100 square miles and 400,000 residents. Here's some Texas trivia for you. The name Dalworthington Gardens combines names of 3 cities, Dallas, Fort Worth, and Arlington. This makes the Gardens the largest city in Texas, not in people, but in letters in its name. 21 plus a space. That's more than any other Lone Star municipality. See there? You learned something already. It's what happens if you stick around too long. Let's move away from City Hall. There's a nice little park, a 1-minute walk from here. Hey, pretty good, you think? The Gardens was one of 34 brand new communities created across the nation during Franklin Roosevelt's presidency. Such communities being a favorite of First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. And usually what the First Lady wants, she gets. As noted, they were part of what's termed subsistence homesteads. There were 5 of these in Texas. The only Texas survivor as an independent city today, which is more than 80 years later, being Dalworthington Gardens. The closest one to the Gardens in Texas was in Wichita Falls, which is about 100 miles northwest of here. Here's an early photo of how those developments looked. All this took place during the Great Depression when so many people suffered economic hardships. Eleanor, bless her aristocratic heart, wanted to recreate the kind of pastoral villages she'd seen in France. Small, pleasant homes on little tracts of land that were big enough for people to grow much of what they needed in gardens, plus room for a little livestock. Some chickens here, milk here, there, like that. It was sort of back to the land, sort of. Self-sufficiency, sort of. Now, in the U.S. version of Eleanor's vision, these pastoral communities were close enough to large cities to provide other jobs. Dalworthington Gardens, as a subsistence homestead, was established in 1934. Originally, it was 593 acres with 80 lots ranging from 4 to 25 acres, though I've read slightly different maximums and minimums. It was not originally a town, but rather a sort of a federal community loosely run by residents and elected administrator. Quite unique. Now, I'll scatter pictures of original subsistence communities here and there in this video. Just don't think that's the way things look now, particularly not in the Gardens. Why this location for subsistence programs? Okay, I'll tell you. FDR's son, Elliot, was engaged to a Fort Worth woman. Eventually, she'd be the second of Elliot's 5 wives. While visiting future bride number 2, Eleanor saw this undeveloped area between Fort Worth and Dallas, and she decided it was a good site for a subsistence homestead. Now you know why the main drag through the middle of the Gardens is Roosevelt Drive. There used to be an Eleanor Drive in the Gardens, but residents apparently changed the name because of some annoyance about development delays. Sure, blame poor Eleanor as if she didn't have enough issues already, but that's another story. This new place originally had no fences, no water, no sewers, no schools, no libraries, but it did have an abundance of poor clay and rocky soil for farming. Sort of like a lot of Texas. Regardless, some people like the subsistence idea. They might have been sick of life on the farm or in the city, but they weren't ready for big city life or for the farm life. This was something new, yet something familiar. They began showing up in the Gardens before the amenities did. The Gardens had an elected administrator, sort of like a mayor, but not really a mayor. And by the way, the original charter rules excluded any kind of property owners except whites, which made it segregation by federal rule. This was unusual even for this era. To qualify, You had to have limited income, fill out what I'm told was a very complicated application, and also write an essay about why you wanted to live here. Terms were enticing, with a 40-year loan. The average monthly mortgage payment with land, a house, water, chicken shed, a little barn, taxes, and insurance ran less than, get this, $25 a month. Such a deal, even figuring inflation in. What these new residents found originally was a lot of dirt, with 3 gravel roads running north-south and 3 gravel roads east-west. Here's one of those roads. Things did smooth out eventually, though the startup of the new community was definitely ragged, with farm animals running loose because of no fences, and a water system built with oil field pipes that had to be replaced because the water was rendered undrinkable. Yeah, the developer was indicted. Stuff happens when the government starts throwing money around. Things rocked along through the Depression and World War II. The Gardens, a little self-sufficiency island that was then 4 miles from Arlington city limits. The feds did offer a bit of expertise like these booklets, but not much else. Meanwhile, Arlington kept growing and eventually surrounded the Gardens. Gardens residents did, however, see the lights of an ever-growing Arlington coming closer and closer. Finally, in 1949, the populace incorporated as a city before they could be annexed by Arlington. Top political topics since incorporation tend to focus on changing the mayor every few terms, water bills, and opposition to commercial or other non-residential development like liquor stores, mostly on the town's fringes. Commercial intrusions cannot happen, of course, unless someone who owns Gardens real estate receives an offer they just can't refuse. Some people these days still keep a horse on their Gardens properties because of the large lots, but not many. Few of those original subsistence homes remain. In fact, I found none at all, though at least a few 1940s or 50s homes are left. Here's a couple of Gardens subsistence homes. Very basic, as the drawing shows. Then the unexpected happened as the years passed. These large lots and low taxes in this modern era began appealing to a much more affluent demographic as the surrounding metroplex grew. Older residents were mostly bought out. Original housing was flattened. Most of the Gardens housing today ranges from really nice homes, like this one, for example. Love those yucca plants. Then again, some garden homes can be spectacular. Consider this as an example. Okay, this one might be a little more than spectacular. These statues are a nice touch, though perhaps unexpected for suburban neighborhoods. Rumor is this house also has a bowling alley. Or maybe you like this domicile. It just needs a moat and drawbridge. The driveway for this house is longer than the block I live on. If Eleanor's ghost showed up in the Gardens today, she'd think some of these self-sufficiency homesteaders had prospered a little bit more than she anticipated. And yes, some of the neighborhoods are gated, and yes, they are pricey. The median home in the Gardens today is appraised at slightly more than $400K, above average for Texas. Median means half the homes exceed $400K. Average median household income is about $170K, which means half the households exceed that. Also pretty good by Texas standards, or any standards. Better than good. In time, the minimum lot size first dropped to 2 acres, then a half acre, which I'm told it is now. Many lots, though, are much bigger. The town is served by the Arlington School District. Garden residents with library cards typically get them from the Arlington system. It's municipally symbiotic, if you can afford it. The Gardens today is quite the pleasant residential oasis. Commute time to either Fort Worth or Dallas or DFW International is less than 30 minutes. Would-be aldermen can walk the whole town, knock and politic at every door. The population has grown slowly. It's about 2,400 residents now. It's 71% white, the other 39% everything else. The Gardens does have a couple of really nice parks. They have swell little ponds in them, good places for walking, meditation, or feeding a giant mob of ravenous geese and ducks at Pappy Elkins Lake. By the way, don't feed the ducks or geese bread. It's just not good for them. If you should show up with a bread loaf, they'll duck mob you. Okay, I cautioned you already. The oldest continuously operated gardens business is called Green's Produce. It's also a swell place for some funky whirligigs, you think? Lots of new business, of course, arrived after Green's Produce setup. Commerce and new non-residential development keeps nibbling away at the edges of the garden. This is understandable because the gardens and the Arlington and Pantego neighborhoods in proximity are prosperous. These are then irresistible opportunities for business. This encroaching commerce is a trend that many gardens residents dislike, but the nibbling continues. Capitalism at work. Keep in mind that for new commercial development to occur, the owner of gardens properties must first be willing to sell. If there's a persistent gripe about the gardens from outside the community, it's usually about the garden's zealous police force and its intolerance for those who exceed speed limits, particularly on 3 busy streets on city edges. Those would be Arkansas Lane, Pleasant Ridge Road, and Bowen Road. Take this advice. Don't speed in the gardens, not even a little bit. Both tickets and deferred adjudication are just too costly. Somebody has to pay for those Tahoe cruisers. It doesn't have to be you. You've been warned. Thanks for listening to another Arlington Time Capsule. If you've had a gardens experience or you want to chime in with your own view, feel free to make a comment or check out the other Arlington Time Capsules. See you later.